similar to the orbitofrontal syndrome, but actually because a different part of the brain's been damaged that feeds information to the orbitofrontal cortex. Okay, this is where it gets a bit tricky, but the difference between somebody with orbitofrontal damage and amygdala damage is that the orbitofrontal person won't anticipate something bad happening, but if something bad happens, they will have a normal fear reaction in the moment. So you can actually do conditioning experiments where you just blow a jet of air into their eye and you pair it with a tone. So from Pavlovian conditioning, if they hear the beep, after a while they learn to blink because they learn to very sort of anticipate the beep. And people with orbitofrontal damage can still be conditioned to blink when they hear the tone so that the jet of air doesn't hit them in the eye. But people with amygdala damage don't even seem to have that fear in the moment. So they're fearless even when it all kicks off. Yeah?
But I thought psychopaths didn't respond to the air pump test.
Yeah, so this is why orbitofrontal damage, when people relate it to psychopathy, they talk about it as being pseudo-psychopathic. So you might not consider the outcomes of your actions, but in the moment you might still react with fear. Whereas a sort of a purer or developmental psychopath just might not have any fear at all. So they obviously won't fear, they won't anticipate negative consequences of their actions, so they might be disinhibited. But also, even if in the middle of a fight, they might just be absolutely fearless, which is one of the reasons they can be very dangerous. Also, if they don't have fear, they lack the ability to empathise with other people's fear. So if I've grown up and I've never even had fear, conceptually I might be like, oh yeah, people get afraid and they run away, but yeah, I don't get afraid. And then if you're afraid and you're like sort of like this, actually most people, if they see someone's afraid, they tend to inhibit if they're being aggressive because they realise they've sort of won in a dominance struggle. There's no need to be violent. You know, like most animals will do a dominance thing and then one of them will back off and then the other one will leave them alone. Psychopaths, if they don't even understand that people have fear, they'll just carry on hitting them because they just don't care. So they don't empathise because I can't understand what your fear is either because I don't experience it myself. At least that's one of the theories. So that's how the amygdala fits in with this like decision making because it gives an emotional value to it. And then the very last study to show you is that there's a white matter tract. This is sort of like a pathway that links together the amygdala to some of these prefrontal areas, so orbitofrontal cortex, but also the anterior prefrontal cortex. And what this does is it links together the future anticipation with the emotional negative or emotional positive, for that matter. So psychopaths apparently, according to this study, they found that the white matter tract, the right uncinate fasciculus, which links the amygdala to these prefrontal cortical areas, hasn't developed properly in developmental psychopaths. So this isn't brain injury, this is developmental psychopathy now. And what it means is that they can't link their own sense of fear with understanding fear in others or understanding future consequences. So this could explain your successful psychopath that isn't going around chopping people up all the time. They're able to control themselves for positive gain, but not necessarily in terms of fear. They might be capable of fear in the moment, so they're not going to be ridiculously violent, but they're not able to link their sense of fear with their anticipation. So if you annoy them, they will go for you. Or they might plot to get you because they don't empathise with you. And this is quite strong strong evidence for the theory that consciousness itself is the extent to which different information in our brain is integrated. These kind of disconnection syndromes, where you've got one lot of processing, you've got another lot of processing, but you can't put those two sorts of processing together. That means people can lack empathy, even if they are capable of thinking about the future, and they do have those emotions themselves. If they can't link them to, say, the theory of mind. If I go back up one again, there's my pointer. The uncinate fasciculus links to the areas which are critical for theory of mind as well, so inferring other people's moods. So if you can't link your own emotions to your detection of other people's emotions, then even though you might be able to tell what mood someone's in and you experience those emotions themselves, you're not going to be able to empathise with them because you can't put two and two together, if that makes sense. Yeah?
Are you suggesting that these psychopaths, for instance, that they should be treated like any other person with a mental illness?
Yeah, there's a thing called neuroethics, which is a tangent, so I'll talk about it at the end if you like. But basically it's saying, if we find out that these people are acting like a psychopath because there's something wrong with their brain, should we really blame them for it? I think that you do still need to hold people responsible for their actions, but that perhaps, if it's found there's something wrong with their brain, they should be in a secure hospital rather than a prison. Having said that, probably most people that are in a prison have got, about 50% of the prison population has got antisocial personality disorder, about 10% are estimated to be psychopathic. Quite a lot of that could be brain injury.
I'm thinking about the 10% of the people in the workforce who are psychopathic.
Oh right, okay. The type that can control themselves for the purposes of gain, but won't control themselves by caring about your feelings.
Corporates are known to be psychopathic.
Yeah, it's a big thing, the whole, what they call a psychopath in a suit or a successful psychopath, that basically doesn't empathise with other people. Yeah.
Politician, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about this at the end, because it is fascinating and I could talk about it for a long time, but like, we've got about 40 minutes or so. Oh no, 45 minutes. Okay, so yeah, the successful psychopath, we can return to that. Okay, so that's the uncinate particulars. Okay, just a little bit about some relatives talking about people. This is some of my research actually. As well as doing statistical research, I do what I call the common sense approach, where I actually go out and interview relatives of people that are living with somebody with frontal lobe brain injury and get them to say in their own words. Because you can only say so much on a questionnaire. If the question's not there, you can't tick the box. And people have said, like, how this lady says her husband had a lack of motivation and headaches, he could be violent and abusive, he could only concentrate on certain things, he saw things in a black and white way, and if she tried to do things in a different way, he could become very violent and aggressive with her. Another lady said about her husband that he was alright in the hospital, but when he came home, if anyone said anything about him or me, he wanted to get revenge. Another one is, he could be unpredictable in making purchases on a credit card, but when the bill came through, he couldn't remember what it was for. So that could be a memory problem there, it could be slightly different. But, another one is, a lady said that her father died recently. She had to break the news to him, and he said, oh well, should we go for a cup of tea? And you know, this guy's, I know this particular chap, and he's so intact in terms of his intelligence, but his ability to empathise has been just destroyed basically. Then there's another lady talking about her son. If he doesn't get his way, he'll start screaming and biting and kicking and swearing. I'm mostly focusing on the orbitofrontal type of injuries because what I'm looking at is how it can be very stressful living with a brain injured person if they've lost their self-control. And then another one, this is someone that says really inappropriate stories. He can tell like racist or sexist jokes and things like that, and just doesn't appreciate that that might offend people. He doesn't mean it. He's actually a very nice person, but he just doesn't understand. And his dad is worried that one day someone will just beat him up because he'll just offend someone and they'll just beat him up, basically. Okay, so now the second part of the talk. We've got about 40 minutes left. Implications for AGI and brain simulation. Okay, basically what we want to do is to build one of these, right? Okay, I say we, I'm not involved in artificial intelligence. I have no idea how the mechanics of this will work. But what I want to do is, using what we know about human intelligence when parts of the brain don't work properly, is to basically what that implies for AGI and brain simulation. So what we'd really like to do is to make one of these, and what we don't want to do is to make one of these, right? Okay? You know, hand over your flesh and the new world awaits you. We don't want to make psychopathic artificial intelligence that just takes over, because it's cleverer than we are. Perhaps it has brilliant working memory, but it doesn't care about our feelings. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is homologous problems and analogous problems. If we simulated a human brain and we got a bit of it wrong, I think it's a very fair hypothesis to suggest that if that bit of the brain we got wrong didn't work properly, it would be pretty much exactly the same as human brain damage. If it's a good model of a human brain, it works just like it. If we get the orbitofrontal cortex wrong, it won't anticipate the future. If we get dorsolateral prefrontal cortex wrong, it will have rubbish working memory or bad controlled working memory. It's a bit more of a stretch to say that with other sorts of AGI, that if you didn't get the processing for that cognitive skill correct, that you might have a similar behaviour. But I still think it's a reasonable hypothesis, If you fail to get anticipating future consequences right in your AGI, it will be very motivated in the moment and not think about, oh, hang on, this is good now, but is it good later on? So it's not as firm a hypothesis as it is for simulating a human brain, but it's still there. And similarly, you could have homologous or analogous developmental psychological problems, which I've not even talked about, but things like psychopathy, autism, personality disorders. If we're going to make artificial intelligence, it's not going to be perfect first time. It's going to be buggy, like Windows Vista. Right, so there's things like Asimov's laws of robotics. So basically a robot shouldn't be able to harm a person or through inaction allow them to be harmed. A robot's got to do what a person says unless that might harm a person. And a robot needs to protect its own existence as long as such protection doesn't conflict with the other laws. So people have come up with this idea of like friendly AGIs or robots, or whatever you want to say. But I think a lot of Asimov's later work is actually saying that these three laws just wouldn't work. There's all sorts of loopholes and problems. Okay, so I'll refer back to those a little bit later on. Okay, so now I'm going to have some analogous examples. What you need to do now is a little bit of a science fiction scenario. The first half of my talk has been properly referenced science. This is all speculation, but we're a futurist kind of group, so we should be okay with that. Imagine that we've made an AGI and that we have solved the problems of language, vision, movement, speech recognition, all those Broca's and Wernicke area problems, and long-term memory and working memory have been solved. So this is a smart thing, it can see, it can move, it can speak, it understands what you're talking about. Okay, and that's a long way off to be able to solve all those problems. But just imagine we have. And what I would like you guys to think about is, what might this AGI be like if it lacked certain aspects of cognitive processing? What might its behaviour be like? Okay, so if an AGI lacked processing for any sort of aversive state or error detection, what might the AGI act like? This is to see if what I've been telling you earlier has sunk in or if it's gone way over your heads because I spoke too quickly. Any ideas, anyone? Okay, well basically if it didn't have any sort of state to which it was averse or any way of detecting that something was wrong, it would quite happily sit there while you smashed it up with a hammer, right? Which wouldn't be obeying that third law of Asimov's, protect yourself, okay? If it didn't think anything was wrong with being hit or anything wrong with being damaged, it would just sit there with it. Why would it otherwise? And if your AGI was conscious, and I'm going to avoid arguing about this because we could just talk about it forever, if, however, it was unconscious, this artificial intelligence might lack pain because that's what seems to be critical to error detection in human beings. So if you did actually manage to make a machine that was conscious, it might not have pain, but if it was just mathematical, you could say it's aversive states or error detection. Okay, so the next one. So let's assume that it's got that, but it lacks processing for anticipating positive consequences. What might it do if it has problems anticipating positive consequences? Any ideas? I perhaps should have said a bit more about orbitofrontal stuff.
Just sitting in the chair doing nothing.
Yeah, basically, it's not going to be motivated to do anything. If it can't, like, say, there are things that are immediately gratifying, like drugs, sex, food. Like evolution has made us find those things immediately gratifying. But getting out of bed in order to go to the supermarket to get cigarettes or food, right, that in of itself isn't gratifying. It's only the anticipated goal that is gratifying. So a lot of human behaviour that we do aren't things that immediately stimulate us. They're things that are gratifying later on. I perhaps should have said that one of the guys with orbitofrontal damage I work with has problems motivating himself to do anything because he can't imagine positive consequences as well as negative consequences. I focused on the negative ones because, well, for a reason, but people can't anticipate positive consequences either. And the sort of AGI you might have with that could be something like this. And I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed, okay? Anything. Okay, so now what it might be able to do, well, it might go, I don't like this low battery. You could program this in explicitly. Like, it could have a goal state that if its battery goes below 50%, it will seek a plug to plug itself in, right? And if its battery goes below 10%, it's really averse to that, okay? And it will seek a recharge point with priority over other tasks, otherwise it's going to be useless. And this is Asimov's third law again, okay, but from more basic principles.
eventually lead to basically terminate it because